Bureau Security and Investigative Services Advisory Committee. We do not yet have a quorum, but I know that the Director of Consumer Affairs, Dean Grafilo, who's here, a special appearance. Is it on now? Yeah. Our Director, Dean Grafilo, is here. He'd like to address the body as well as swear in new members. And while Mr. Farnby is not here, I know that Mr. Grafilo has a time commitment, so I'm going to exercise the power of the chair and ask Mr. Grafilo to swear in our new members and then address the body, and I can handle the rest later. Microphone is live, so.
Perfect. If you guys just step this way a little bit. And then just raise your right hand and then repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Brian Bogdan,
Do solemnly swear.
do solemnly swear
That I will support and defend.
that I will support and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States
And the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California
Against all enemies.
against all enemies,
Foreign and domestic.
foreign and domestic,
That I will bear true faith and allegiance.
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
To the Constitution of the United States.
to the Constitution of the United States
And the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California.
I take this obligation freely.
I take this obligation freely
Without mental reservation.
without mental reservation
Or purpose of evasion.
or purpose of evasion,
And that I will well and faithfully.
and that I will well and faithfully
Discharge the duties.
discharge the duties
Upon which I'm about to enter.
upon which I'm about to enter.
Congratulations, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, sir.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Director Grafilo. Now I understand you have to, you would like to address our body. And we'd love to hear you.
Thank you, Chief Wu. Committee members, absolutely appreciate the opportunity to provide a very brief department update. As part of the department update, I'll briefly go over some of the highlights from this past year. This past year, we convened 9 licensing and enforcement workgroup meetings, 3 substance abuse coordination committee meetings, 4 directors' quarterly meetings, pro rata workgroup meetings, and 2 director, board member, and advisory committee leadership teleconferences. These activities not only brought us together to promote open dialogue among the department's board and bureaus, but also promoted collaboration to further our mission in protecting California's consumers. As I've shared with some of the other programs that I've presented before them about this past year, unfortunately, with how broad and vast the department is, there is the potential for our programs to get in silos. So it's so very important that we are, in fact, intentional with the meetings that we do, in fact, have. I'm happy with many of the things that have come out from a lot of these discussions. As you folks very well know, what's unique to BSIS is obviously unique. However, there are arguably some best practices that all our programs should in fact be discussing and following and sharing. And in the spirit of cross-pollination, that is one of the intentional goals of the many different meetings that we've had and will continue to have. Related to this year's annual report, I invite you to review DCA's 2018 annual report for a much more comprehensive view of the department's achievements. The report contains statistical and financial record of the work that the department and its boards have achieved over this last year. When you have a moment, I encourage you to visit the DCA website and view the document. Specific to the administration's transition and governor's budget. As you all know, Monday, January 7th marked a new era for our state as Governor Newsom was sworn in as the 40th governor of California. We at DCA are honored and excited to be part of this new team. The department has met with the transition team and many new and some familiar faces that have been appointed to new positions within the governor's office. Our department is looking forward to doing all that we can to further the governor's vision. Specific to his budget. On January 10, the governor released his budget outlining his fiscal priorities for the state. Based on the driving idea of California for all, the governor's budget proposes to pay down debts and pension obligations, continues to build up robust budget reserves, while making significant investments in housing, childcare, healthcare, prescription drugs, preschool, and higher education. Immediately following the budget release, the department hosted a teleconference with board leadership, executive officers, and bureau chiefs to discuss the governor's 1920 proposed budget and to review proposals within the budget specific to the department. I know understanding how the governor's budget translates to your individual budget is a top priority. So I want to reiterate, as mentioned on the call, that our fiscal operations will schedule individual program meetings to discuss individual budgets in greater detail. It's my understanding that the Bureau had their meeting on January 23rd with our budgets unit. Director's quarterly meeting. On this upcoming February 25th, I'll host the first 2019 Director's Quarterly meeting. At this meeting, DCA will provide an update on DCA's regulations unit, the executive officer's salary study, and several division updates. As you may recall, these quarterly meetings are an opportunity to ensure that I'm available to hear important issues facing our boards and bureaus, again, in the spirit of cross-pollination, open communication, and transparency. March will be 2 years being on board at DCA, and we have in fact had quarterly meetings every quarter. I enjoy doing those. Look forward to the upcoming one and obviously the ones following. Related to mandatory sexual harassment prevention training. 2019 is in fact a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year for the department. This means all employees, board members, and advisory committee members are required to complete the training this year, even if you completed it last year. This training is online, interactive, and can be completed at your convenience. If you have questions about this or any other required trainings during your tenure as a committee member, please contact our Office of Board and Bureau Services. The representative from that office today is Karen DeHorace Nelson, who's in the audience here. If you are not familiar with her already, specific to the work with this program, I suspect it behooves all of you to, in fact, do so. Naturally, want to make sure our programs and the department have, again, that direct line of communication. And again, Karen is your direct line. Specific to Sunset Review. As one of our 10 programs undergoing Sunset Review this year, I'd like to personally wish you the best and hope that the board has a smooth Sunset Review. The department is here to offer our support and assistance with whatever you may need during this process. Our legislative affairs staff are available to you for any guidance or preparation needed for your Sunset Review, scheduled this coming February 26. This includes conducting mock hearings or reviewing your questions and responses. It's my understanding a mock hearing is scheduled for tomorrow, February 15th. This concludes the department update, and as always, the department can be of service for you folks in any way. Happy to entertain any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Director Grafilo. Are there any questions for our director? Seeing none, before I let him go, I want to make sure that Mr. Anton Farmby is not in the audience. Thank you, Dean. Excuse me, thank you, Director. A little bit too formal there, informal. I see that we have another on the, joined us on the dais. Do we now have a quorum? We still do not have a quorum. Okay. Well, then let's move forward with the items that do not require a quorum. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Frank, would you lead us?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is review and approval of the minutes from October 11th. If you have, that requires a quorum because we're going to approve the minutes. But if you have not read the minutes, they are on our website. Is that correct, Antoine?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. So we'll be coming back to that, but in the meantime, if you have not already, please review them before we come back to that item. I just want to, moving on to to the agenda. All of you have seen the agenda, I hope, have a copy in front of you. I am exercising the privilege of the chair. I will be combining items 7 and 13, which are the discussion of future advisory committee meeting locations in Northern and Southern California, and 13, which is committee members' recommendations for items for future advisory committee meeting agenda. And then also, it has come to my attention that there is some information that I need to review first. And so, as again, exercising the prerogative of the chair, I'm going to strike item 11, which is discussion regarding alarm agent negotiating and soliciting arm agreements. That's not quite ready for prime time, so I'm going to reserve that for a future advisory committee meeting. So I don't have any formal comments. I just want to welcome everybody and Happy New Year. As I am Chinese, this is the year of the boar or the year of the pig, and I welcome everybody to a healthy and prosperous year. I hope things are going well for you. We've had a pretty wet February, and I'm glad that all of you are here safely. I live near the Executive Airport in Sacramento, and in the 24-hour period ending at 4 a.m., we received 2.11 inches of rain. That is more than the month of February in Sacramento by itself. Stay away from the rivers. They're releasing much more water from Lake Folsom right now in order to prepare for the runoff that's expected because of this atmospheric river. Snow levels are not low. They are up around 8,000 feet, which means it's raining below, and that water is going to run downhill towards us. And as I was driving in this morning, a portion of I-5 was flooded, and so be very, very careful as you leave the meeting today. Those are my welcoming remarks. I'm going to move on to updates, and bear with me while I go through these stats. It is an exciting time for us because I think that we're overall moving in the right direction in terms of our turnaround times for our licensing. So first, for licensing, this is regarding applications received. For the period July 1st, which is the beginning of our fiscal year, through December 31st, so that's the first and second quarters of the fiscal year, BSIS received 39,792 initial applications and 52,378 renewal applications. I think that the security guard business is well, and I hope it's healthy. This equates to an average of 6,632 initial applications each month and 8,730 renewal applications a month. For comparison, during that same period, 2017-2018, the Bureau received 42,000 initial applications for licensure when 52,832 applications for renewal. This is a 6% decrease in initial applications, and we see that the renewals are trending flat. Overall, there's a 67% Breeze participation rate for initial applications and 48% for renewals. That's good, and I hope that the industry continues to encourage their members or prospective members to utilize the services of Breeze, because we are seeing quicker turnaround times with the use of Breeze. Regarding security guard applications themselves, 86% of initial and 58% of renewals were submitted through Breeze. Participation in Breeze Online for this category of licenses remains consistent with prior record periods. For alarm agents, Breeze continues to increase. Use of Breeze continues to increase. First half of 2018-19 fiscal year, we had 87% participation for initial license applications and 61% participation for renewal applications. This is up 62% for initials and 50% for renewal applications for the same period in fiscal year 17 and 18. Proprietary security officers have seen a slight increase in Breeze participation for initial applications, 37% participation for the first half of fiscal year 2018-2019 compared to 32% for the same period of 17-18. There's more significant increase in the Breeze participation for renewal applications, which are up 24% for the first half of fiscal year 18-19 versus 12% for 17-18. Locksmith employee Breeze participation remains flat on initial applications, but there's an increase in participation for renewal applications from this time 17-18 to now 18-19. Initial firearm permit applications continue to decrease. BSIS received 4,932 initial firearms applications for period July 1st through December 31st, 2018. Firearms permit renewals remain consistent with the Bureau receiving 5,730 renewal applications for the same period. With respect to firearms, we have instituted, as you know, the firearms assessment. A total of 3,397 applications are eligible to take the assessment, and were issued letters of eligibility to take the assessment. That so far only 1,378 applicants have completed the assessment. 1,207 were found capable of demonstrating that they possess appropriate judgment, restraint, and self-control for the purposes of carrying a firearm on duty. And 171 were unable to demonstrate that they possess the appropriate judgment, restraint, and self-control for purposes of carrying a firearm on duty, which translates to an 88% passage rate. 143 of those applicants have appealed their assessment as of January 31st, 2019. So those are the licensing statistics. I'm sorry if they were boring, but are there any questions regarding that update? Well, believe me, with all these applications, new and renewals coming in, our people are plenty busy. So moving on then to the enforcement update. For the fiscal year 18-19 to date, which is 7 months, because these stats are good to January 31st. Our enforcement staff have completed 67 company inspections. Of the 67 inspections completed, 49% were private patrol operators, 21% were firearm training facilities, 13% were alarm company operators, 13% were repossession agencies, and 3% were baton training facilities. The Bureau is working to increase the number of inspections. However, our staffing continues to be a challenge. We recently filled vacancies, which were mentioned at the last advisory committee meeting, and management is working on training and getting new analysts up to speed with the Bureau. We continue to utilize student assistants to assist with complaint intake in order to help streamline the investigation process. Additionally, the Bureau reclassified our lead AGPA, which is a Associate Governmental Planning analyst position in enforcement that was vacated previously due to a retirement last November, to a staff services manager 1 position in order to allow that person to oversee the complaint intake and complaint resolution process, hopefully which is expected to reduce investigation timelines and increase our production. That is the conclusion of my enforcement update. Do I have any questions on that? Seeing no questions, let's move on to new legislation. We have one piece of legislation that was signed into law by Governor Brown, which impacts the Bureau and the private security industries. And some of you may have heard of AB 2138 by members Chu and Low. This limits disciplinary actions for criminal convictions older than 7 years. This legislation applies to many of the boards and bureaus in the Department of Consumer Affairs, and requires that in order to implement this, BSIS and many other of the other boards and bureaus must implement regulations. We are in the process of developing those regulations, and I have Matt Bowden here from our enforcement bureau division in order to speak to 2138. Matt?
Good morning. Is this one on? Good morning. Again, my name is Matt Bowden. I'm the manager of the Bureau's Disciplinary Review Unit. My unit is part of the enforcement side of the office, and one of our primary duties is the evaluation of criminal records for our applicants and the decision-making process for determining whether those applicants should be denied or issued a license based on their criminal background and any evidence of rehabilitation that the Bureau receives pertaining to that criminal background. Initially, AB 2138 appeared in its amendment process to potentially have significant effects to how we would do our reviews, but through the process and due to various sources, I'm sure including different boards and bureaus within the department, changes were made to where a 5-year limit went to 7 years. That's probably something you may or may not be aware of. And the definition of what crimes would be considered after 7 years was changed from violent felonies to serious felonies. Violent felonies is a much more restrictive definition in law than serious felonies. The final form of the bill is in large part in keeping with the Bureau's current practices. The Bureau currently, up to 7 years, is considering everything that is criminally substantially related to the duties of any of our license categories, and specifically to that applicant's license category. So if there's a conviction that is substantially related to that license category, up to 7 years, we can consider any offense that's a conviction. After 7 years, the Bureau, because we also consider time frame since convictions, the Bureau was already looking at more serious offenses after the 7-year mark. And specifically, the bill references section, left my glasses? Sorry. Thank you. Specifically, the bill mentions those serious felonies as defined by section 1192.7 and the higher 2 tiers of sexual registrants, which are 20-year and lifetime sexual registrants, 290 registrants. Our previous practices are, as I said before, very much in alignment with these practices. I think it's a good framework. I think the framework is such that it puts in place, in law, in statute, practices that the Bureau was already doing, but maintains it going forward, that the Bureau does not go into excessive consideration of things that have been determined by the legislature to be not necessarily needed. And it also puts that plan across the board for the department. So all bureaus and boards will be on the same page as to how they consider those topics. You can review 1192.7 and see that it includes a lot of the higher serious felonies that, you know, we would all probably have reason to want more information on minimally, which is evidence of rehabilitation. And more significantly, you would want a longer term maybe of rehabilitative behavior before you would necessarily grant a license. In many cases, the Bureau will not get necessarily rehabilitation information at the application stage, but the Bureau has a very strong appeal process in place that allows, unlike many boards and bureaus, we have both disciplinary review committees, which are appointed by the governor, and that provides an expedited review process where someone who receives a denial based on conviction history has the ability to get heard rather quickly and present evidence of rehabilitation. Oftentimes, they will present evidence of rehabilitation with an appeal of a denial, which will be considered even before DRC by the office itself, by us. So my unit will take a look at that. It will generally come to me. I will look at that. And if there's sufficient evidence of rehabilitation there, the Bureau's initial decision can be modified to grant the license. If there's still questionable whether or not it's sufficient, it would proceed through the appeals processes. The secondary appeal process after a DRC hearing, disciplinary review committee hearing, would be an administrative law hearing. And that's always available to an applicant who does not either succeed in the DRC hearing or who initially chooses to go that route. It does also discuss disciplinary actions by other licensing boards, both within and outside the state, and the Bureau's ability to use those up to 7 years. That is something that is also consistent with what we would see in the past, specifically if those actions by the other boards or bureaus are based on conviction history also. So we don't see that causing a change in our practices. So basically, I just wanted to give some comfort to any members that think that the Bureau's primary job of protecting the public and protecting consumers is being negatively impacted by this. I don't see this as being any negative impact to those concerns. I think by having it in statute and by the Bureau's process of putting that statute into the regulatory process, it'll actually create a framework that is going to provide for consistency going forward. I believe we've been consistent already, so I think that application is something that will keep us in line and bring all boards and bureaus into the same page. Any questions?
Do we have any questions for Matt? Brian?
I have quite a few of them, actually. Is the crimes that are substantially related language limited to 7 years in the Bureau's understanding? Or can substantially related crimes, not including serious felonies, which we already know are part of that, but substantially related crimes being, say, let's say burglary, that's not a serious felony outside of 7 years? How does the Bureau?
It's considered, if it's a crime that's substantially related, it can be considered up to 7 years if it's not a serious felony. If it's a serious felony, it would be considered indefinitely. That doesn't mean we're going to deny on it. It just means that we can use it as a cause for denial beyond 7 years. So yeah, first-degree burglary is a serious felony pursuant to 1192.7. Other forms of burglary, non-residential burglary, are not.
Right.
But during that 7-year process, if we see a history of burglary for someone who is going to be a guard or an alarm agent or a locksmith, or any of basically most of our license categories, that would be something that would be considered in the denial process and would be legitimate cause for denial. Now, if it's 6 years and it's a misdemeanor, it might be different than if it's 2 years and it's a misdemeanor. If it's 6 years and it's a misdemeanor and the person submits substantial evidence of rehabilitation with their application package, you'll get a different result potentially than if it's a 2-year person that hasn't done anything like that.
Subjective.
To the degree that we are using our regulations set out that we consider the seriousness of the offense along with the passage of time, along with other considerations, potentially how that person performs under parole or probation. So if we see violations of probation from a 5-year crime, it might bring it more into a kind of a recent structure than we would if it's a 5-year crime where the person completed parole in 2 years, or not parole, probation most likely. So those are all weighed in there, and they're all set out in our regulations. I know our regulations will be adjusted to more align with the new statutory language.
And on that topic, are the crimes going to be, is there going to be more of a structure within the regulations to call out specific crimes that will bar application? I know that you just said that there is a certain level of variance depending on the crime itself, but I know that the Bureau is inundated with calls constantly on new applications and whatnot on whether or not a previous crime is going to bar them from licensure. So I know that the alarm companies are constantly looking for some type of guardrails or guidelines, I should say, that we can go to applicants that we know are going to work in our industry on what would and would not constitute. And outside of serious felony, which is kind of black and white, is there anything else that's going to go into the regulation that would call out non-serious felonies that would potentially bar?
The regulations are in the early stages of being updated, and I think that I'd have to defer to the policy unit or to the chief on how exactly those are going to end up. I don't think there's going to be a list of misdemeanor convictions that, you know, if I'm on this list within 3 years, I won't get a license, so why bother? I don't think it's going to be that cut and dry because the other considerations regarding evidence of rehabilitation could change that. So we can't say, you know, a person with a 3-year misdemeanor will be denied unless they present these types of evidence of rehabilitation. It would be too exhaustive of a list to try to complete, I believe. Now, the opportunity for review of all that evidence of rehabilitation is what gives us reason to adjust how the denial decision is made.
And then my last question, the Bureau does not have jurisdiction over fire alarm systems or fire components in and of themselves, but the industry, obviously the alarm industry, installs this type of devices. Is arson, even though I know it's not directly related to what the Bureau covers, is arson considered in a denial of licensure, and can you speak to arson at all?
There's no specific list, but depending on if it's a felony arson, if it's an arson that shows, you know, a tendency to not control one's aggressive behaviors, because that's something that we are putting people out in the public who are supposed to be protecting the public, or going into people's homes to install devices. And if we've got someone that has demonstrated through their criminal activity that they have these issues, it would be something that we may ask for evidence of rehabilitation to substantiate that this is not an issue going forward, because we can't allow the public to not be protected in that manner.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, let me also suggest this. I mean, you suggested that maybe our review would be subjective. I'd like to think that our people are objective when they review, and so that standard for me is what would a reasonable person take into consideration when they're reviewing applications, when they're guided by if there's a nexus between that which they are applying for and the crimes that they have previously committed. We'll take a closer look, and then we'll also take a closer look with respect to proof of rehabilitation. But I think that single isolated incidences are one-off, will be given different scrutiny than for somebody who has a chronic perpetuation to be an arsonist or something like that. You know, a child at the age of 12 who liked to play with matches may no longer be that as an adult. So again, I hope that we look at this objectively And that's the approach that I would like to take as we move forward with respect to proposal of regulations.
And to add on that a little bit, sometimes we've seen arson charges where there's maybe sometimes significant time has passed and you see other convictions around that charge that would lead a common, normal, reasonable person to see that the individual at the time maybe had a transient lifestyle, maybe started fires for warmth and got convicted of something getting out of hand. So those are things that are other considerations as opposed to what the chief was talking about, someone who may be a serial arsonist.
I'd like to think that we look at the totality of the circumstances. I also note that there is a carve-out for the private investigator industry, and we will be looking at whether or not they have previously committed financial crimes. They and a couple of other of our bureaus and boards within DCA have that responsibility as well.
And that carve-out is to extend beyond the 7 years. So financial crimes may be something that we could look at for most of our people up to 7 years. If it's, embezzlement and we've got someone who's working in a situation where their position, one of their duties would put them in a position that lent itself to the ability to embezzle, we could consider that for any of our license categories. But for a private investigator, it would bring those things into an outside of the 7 year with no end limit. Doesn't mean they're going to get denied for it. If it's 15 years ago and they say, look, here's all my evidence of rehabilitation, the consideration could be granted. But it means that we can consider it and determine whether or not they continue to be a potential threat to the public. One thing I just wanted to touch on, the chief gave you a lot of numbers earlier, and I just kind of thought I'd tie that in with what our unit sees. He talked about the 6,682 applications per month. The Bureau, on average, sees about 20% of those with criminal history. So we're seeing 1,300 to 1,400 criminal history responses a month that we are reviewing under these guidelines and our existing practices, which, like I said, are consistent with what's going to happen. So it's a lot of work, and we get people done as timely as we can, and we're as responsive as we can be to people who wish to appeal any kind of denials that go out there. We want to see their evidence of rehabilitation. Most of our people don't realize that they can optionally provide that at the application period. So we may not have that information. We're not necessarily able to require that information. That's another change of this bill, is that we can't require people to disclose their criminal background. We can't require them to provide evidence of rehabilitation, but we can make it known to them that they are allowed to provide that. And our current denial letters tell them that. And going forward, I'm sure we'll bolster that in the website too, and to public outreach, that with your application, we're not going to ask them about their history, but in the event you have a history that you would like to provide evidence of rehabilitation of, because the Bureau's going to get it, you can do that at this point, and it will be considered with the history.
And I think in part we're thinking along those lines in order to assist in expediting application review rather than waiting back and forth for documents to come back. Right?
Sorry, so I have one more question on that note. So there's been a little bit of confusion, and I'm curious if it's going to change. So currently, an applicant for an ACE license, if they answer that they have not had a conviction on question 10, they're provisionally able to work in the scope of that licensure until they get the determination or yay or nay on their license. Is that going? You just said that you're not going to ask them if they have a criminal history. Is that change? Is question 10 changing or no?
My understanding is that the legislation does not allow boards and bureaus to ask people to provide information regarding their past criminal history. So I believe that will change on all our applications. It doesn't change the law that says you can't work on a temporary if you have previous history. So either the applicant has to be asked and answered by his employer, because at the point of offering employment, the employer can request criminal history information or do their own background check. And then the employer would be basically needing to know that this person doesn't have a criminal history before they work them on a temporary. So it does not alleviate them of the inability to work on a temporary if they have a criminal history. It just alleviates them of having to tell us about it.
So under section, for 2138, under section 4480, looks like 2E, and this goes into, I think, what we're all talking about. So a board may deny a license related by this code on the grounds that the applicant knowingly made a false statement of fact that is required to be revealed in the application for the license. Then, kind of contrary to that, a board shall not deny a licensure based solely on the applicant's failure to disclose a fact that would not have been cause for denial of the license had it been disclosed. The confusion, I guess, here, and maybe this is a conversation to take offline, is that under the provisional status of working as an ACE, that's contingent on the person indicating that they have not been convicted of a previous crime. And so, therefore, the way that things currently run is a little bit of a conflict, because if the applicant answered incorrectly, they're basically lying for purposes of being temporarily licensed until they get the denial. So I think that currently this is something that we should kind of or the Bureau should look into, because we have a great kind of case study here on how to implement this one paragraph. So that.
I thank you for bringing that to our attention, because indeed, as you raise it, this is going to take much further thinking. And, the authors weren't likely not provided with all these scenarios that could come up in their deliberations in crafting the law. So, thank you. Any other questions for Matt? Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
I'd like to note now that we might have a quorum. So with that, I will ask our secretary to call the roll.
BSIS Advisory Committee roll call for February 14th, 2019. Brian Boglin.
Present.
Simon Cruz. Anton Farmby.
Present.
Frank Huntington. Present. Todd Ingalls.
Present.
Lynn Moorfeld.
Present.
Nancy Murish. Eli Owen.
Present.
Stanton Perez.
Present.
One, two, three, four, 7 present, quorum met.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Moving back then to our agenda where we left off, item 5, now that we have a quorum, is review and approval of the minutes from October 11th Advisory Committee meeting. As I stated earlier, the minutes are on the BSIS website. We have them posted. And so I would like to ask if there are any comments or corrections that are identified from any of our board members here. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from October 11, 2018.
Stan Perez, I motion approval.
Frank Huntington, second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Approve. Any noes? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Continuing on item 6, sunset review. The director mentioned that this agency is subject to sunset. We have been working on our sunset report, and in early December sent our sunset report to the legislature. We are scheduled for joint hearings on February 26th. Is a Tuesday, and I invite you all to attend and participate if you like. I'm not The public will be afforded about 20, 30 minutes for public comments. I will only be afforded 5 minutes to introduce the Sunset Report, and then bare my soul as I'm peppered with questions from committee members. Our Sunset Review has been online since early December. I don't know, I invite you all to read it if you haven't. And I look forward to your participation at those hearings as well. For now, though, are there any questions regarding the sunset or your participation, or any observations that you made about the Sunset Report?
What's the location? Will be held?
Antoine, can you give him the site?
Well, you can get it on the California State Assembly's website or Senate website, but it's going to be in Capitol Room 4202 on February 26th, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
I believe the hearings begin at 9. There are 5 agencies being heard on that day. Each agency will be afforded about 1 hour. Of the 5, BSIS is in the middle, so if they took them in order, I would expect close to or immediately before lunchtime to be heard. Thank you. Any other comments or questions regarding Sunset? Just as an FYI, Director Grafilo also mentioned Murder Board. I don't know what that is, but I've been told that it's a mock hearing, which will be held tomorrow. Tomorrow afternoon, 3:30. I believe in this room, or the other room that we met in on headquarters 2. I'll clarify that later on. But anyway, I think it's an opportunity for our executive staff to start grilling me in preparation for that, for those hearings. So I don't look forward to it tomorrow, but I'll be there anyway. We've already hit item 8, which was Matt's discussion on AB 2138, talking about serious felonies. And I mentioned the carve-out for private investigators regarding financial crimes. And just as an FYI, as part of the exercise for our legal department, who will be heading up the global regulation package for the entire Department of Consumer Affairs, we were asked to identify any denials that we have of private investigators based on prior financial crimes. And in the last 5 years, we've turned down only 2. I think one of the crimes was forgery, and I think the second crime was embezzlement. So I think the prospective private investigator industry probably does a good job of self-regulating themselves, thinking if they've committed a financial crime, maybe this is not where I should be going seeking a license. So that's just an observation that I'm making, seeing that we've only turned down 2 in 5 years because of financial crimes. Any comments on that? Item 9. Discussion on statutorily mandated claims reporting PI and alarm companies organized as limited liability companies. I'd like to invite Gloriela Garcia, our manager of licensing. And Gloriela, while you're up there, would you like to introduce your 2 new program tech supervisors?
Yes. Can you hear me?
No? Push the button. Push it again.
Hello. Okay. Okay, so yes, I would like to introduce two of our licensing supervisors. If you can stand up, Malcolm Soneja and Jessica Combs. Thank you very much. We're proud to have them on board and helping us process those applications as fast as we can.
Thank you, Gloria.
You're welcome. Okay. So Alarm Company, as a result of the enactment of Senate Bill 904 last year, effective January 1st of this year, an alarm company operator licensee organized as a limited liability company must report to the Bureau each year by March 1st, the date and the amount of any claim paid during the prior calendar year from the general liability insurance company or policies it must maintain pursuant to Business and Professions Code 7599.34. On January 11th of this year, the Bureau sent all alarm company operator licensees organized as a limited liability company a letter notifying them of the new reporting requirement and the March 1st deadline for reporting this information. Enclosed with the letter was the form the Bureau developed for the companies to report their claim information. Additionally, Senate Bill 904 added Business and Professions Code Section 7599.35 to require the Bureau to report to the legislature by January 1st of 2023. Information about the claims data, as well as the information relating to the renewal of licensees organized as LLCs. Okay, moving on to private investigator. As a result of Senate Bill 559, which was enacted in 2017, but went into effect July 1st, 2018. A private investigator licensee organized as a limited liability company must report to the Bureau any claim filed against and any claim paid by the general liability insurance policy or policies. It is required to maintain pursuant to Business and Professions Code 7520.3. In late spring of 2018, the Bureau issued a letter to all PI licensees organized as an LLC, advising them of the new reporting requirement. Included with the letter was a form which the PI licensee could use to assist them with the reporting requirement. Due to the small number of licensees who provided the information, the Bureau sent a reminder letter January 7th of this year, again advising them of the reporting requirement. To date, 73% of the PI LLC licensees have provided their claim data. Additionally, Business and Profession Code 75203 requires the Bureau to post a notice of each claim on the department's license search website. Failing to comply with either alarm or private investigator claim reporting requirements is a violation of the respective practice acts that can result in the Bureau taking disciplinary action against the licensee. So if I can ask for your guys' help to please get the word out about the importance of providing the Bureau the insurance claim information, we would greatly appreciate it. Any questions? Yes?
Brian?
Yeah, I have a few. So this kind of created quite a buzz. I got a lot of calls before this meeting, and so there was a few questions. Is there an FAQ that the Bureau's developed online anywhere about frequently asked questions or?
No, this just was, as I stated before, just enacted this year. I mean, implemented. So I'm sure we'll have lessons learned, and we can definitely streamline that a little bit more.
Excellent.
Well, and let me encourage you, Brian, that if you have questions, because it created a lot of buzz in the industry, please share those questions with us, and then we can create an FAQ to meet your client's needs.
I just didn't want to put the cart before the horse if you guys already had come up with something.
Oh,
I wasn't aware of.
gotcha. Yeah.
So one of the questions that was driving was that this is specific to claims to the insurance company. So if it was settled or paid directly by the alarm company outside of making a claim through the insurance company, is that something that you're interested in?
We're only interested in the general liability insurance policies
Okay. Yeah,
or policy.
because there was a question if there was like a dollar limit, obviously if the claim or the settlement, I guess, that's worked out between an alarm company and a person making a claim is below a certain amount, typically that company may just pay that out cash and not actually go through the insurance company.
Okay.
So is that something that the Bureau would like reported on any type of claim from a end user, or only if it rises to the company making the decision to actually do a claim through the insurance company?
The latter. Yes.
Excellent. What is this? Do we know what the cycle is going to be on this?
The cycle,
Is this an ongoing, like when there's a claim we need to report it, or is it every?
yes, ongoing. So the sooner we can get the notice, the better. And lessons learned with the PI, we'll try to be proactive as well if we're not getting a good response rate, to send letters out, business process, to get the word out of, please submit your claim information.
Okay, so since it was enacted on January 1st, is this going, are you asking alarm companies to go back a certain length of
The
time?
prior year, yes.
Okay.
And it's due March 1st of this year.
Is there any way to submit it online, or is it only through the main
Yeah.
the main reason behind that was because for some companies have multiple ACOs and they've only received one of these notices.
Okay.
So it'd be easier for some organizations to just go to the Bureau and pull that information off of there or submit it online. And so I was just curious if there's a process for that.
So the bill is only requiring, date and the amount of the paid claim. So I would say it would be easy for them to email the alarm desk a copy of the claim or just all the information that we're requesting, and then the alarm desk can
Yes.
triage those.
Yes. Thank you.
I think that's the top level stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
And now on to PIs.
Yes.
73% of us are reporting. There's not a lot of LLCs, I believe, but there are some. Is there, and I've not seen the form,
Okay.
if there's been no claims made, can they ignore the form, or is there a checkbox that says there's been no claims made?
Thank you for your question. Yes, so we ideally would like the form received, whether or not a claim was made. So we do have a checkbox option for no claim made within that period of time.
Okay, but is it mandatory? It sounds like it's mandatory to report claims, and I could see, I'm not an
Yes.
LLC, but I can see somebody saying, well, I've had no claims, so I'm just going to ignore this. And I can see that would not be in violation of the statute. Is that correct?
It would not be a violation, however,
I know you would like
It
to
would-
encourage that.
we want to encourage it because then there's really no way of us knowing if the industry is being responsive to what the legislature intent is.
Right.
So yes,
Okay, thank you, Gloria.
you're welcome. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gloriella. And thank you, Brian and Frank, for your questions. It is important for us. We had a discussion in-house about whether or not, if there was no claim to file, whether or not they should report. But again, I think the important part is we would not know that they did not have a claim if they didn't tell us they didn't have a claim. So then we wouldn't have a gap in our data, in that we would maintain only 76% of those LLCs actually responded, because we don't know what the other 24% are. So that's what the discussion in-house was. Next is item 10, discussion regarding private investigator PI audit and proposed PI fee adjustment. In your packet, there is a second piece of paper. That piece of paper is entitled Private Investigator Act Fee Adjustment Summary Sheet, January 2019. BSIS is funded by two funds. They have a Private Security Services Fund, as well as a private investigator license fund. The bottom line, we had an audit performed on the PI, Private Investigator Fund, because there was a strong suspicion that in fact it was going to run out of money someday, and someday soon. As you know, the private security services fees were increased a couple years ago, and it was this is a similar exercise. I just wanted to inform you that in doing budgets, our budget people believe that we as an organization should be maintaining 3 to 5 month reserve for uncertain economic times, and it has been 3 to 5 months for the PI fund, but the 1920 fiscal year, even with the most positive factors, the PI fund is expected to end with less than a month, in fact, half a month of reserve. And if you look at the numbers, you don't look at the licensing and renewal numbers in a most optimistic fashion. There might only be a couple days of reserve in the fund, and that is not economically prudent. So if you look at this one-page sheet that we have tossed out there, provided for you, we are identified what the current fees are, and we have identified what the floor. The floor is basically those numbers suggested by the PI audit, and we have a ceiling which is identified, which is basically 10% more than the floor. The reason why we're proposing this is that it will allow the BSIS to adjust the licensing fees without having to return to the legislature for new approval. And this is consistent with the manner that we have with the PSS fund. That's basically all I have. I'm certain that the legislature will be querying me on this on February 26th, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. I have had preliminary discussions with some members from the PI industry. I thank you, Frank, for coming and sharing with us what your thoughts were on this.
Thanks, and just to share my thoughts with the rest of the board, I personally, I don't want to speak for the PIs, but personally I think that, I know we haven't had a renewal increase in several years, so I think that's quite appropriate. What concerns me greatly, however, is the initial application going from 225 to approximately 825. We have seen a huge decrease in the number of PI applicants over the last year or two, and I'm concerned for our industry if that continues, and that such a huge increase on the initial application may very well take its toll for someone on the fence about retiring from law enforcement, maybe becoming a PI, but seeing that huge chunk of money and deciding not to do that. So that would be my concern for the initial application.
Thank you, Frank. Any other comments or questions?
I have a question.
Mr. Farmy.
Are we aware of the reason or the rationale behind such a huge jump? I mean, that's
The yeah, and as Frank mentioned, it had not been the fees have not been increased in several years. In reality, the fees have not been increased in more than 20 years, and so they are the current fees for private investigators are really low when compared to other BSIS license fees. Currently, as I mentioned, that those fees going into the private security, the PSS fund, were adjusted upward a few years ago. And if you look on the second, the backside of that sheet, information sheet, you'll see comparisons between the private investigator licensing fees and other BSIS fees. And so I'm cognizant of Mr. Huntington's comments regarding his fear with respect to the agents, to the those participating licensees in the PI industry. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that the PI fund is going to be upside down soon if nothing is done to correct that. There might be other measures which may help to mitigate the fund problem, but that is for those on a higher pay grade than myself to make that decision. I'm just presenting the facts. You're welcome.
I'm sorry, Mr. Huntington, do you anticipate, this is just my own, I'm just curious, do you anticipate any adverse impact on how many PIs that, you anticipate will continue, over the course of the year due to the increase?
No, like I said, as far as renewals go, I don't anticipate that big of an impact. That is, I think we're all reasonable enough to know that I don't think our renewals have gone up in 20 years, and this is absolutely fair. I think most people will say that. Like I say, my greatest concern is for new licensees, and to reiterate, we've already seen such a drop in new licensees that we're concerned about the profession.
And just to echo what Frank is saying, the audit was performed projecting a flat rate, continual rate of new private investigator licenses. But in reality, there's been a diminution year by year of new applications. So I'm cognizant of the concern from the industry, and we already, without fee increases, we're already seeing that decline in initial applications.
That's correct.
You're welcome.
Just one more question.
Yes.
In terms of the renewal fee and the new fee, is there an ability to, if the renewals have been stable, is there an ability to, or a consideration to increase the renewal fee and then lower the new fee?
I can tell you that is in discussions, but I have to be very careful how I answer that. We have an obligation to protect our licensees, and yet I'm still trying to consider future licensees. So, but I know that's been a matter of discussion.
Following up on that, just as an exercise in math, if our renewals are stable and our new licensees are in fact going down, take that fee, that's the renewal fee, and increase that, and lower the other one, and you're probably going to either come out even or a little ahead and protect that and be able to build that reserve up that you need.
Well, and that's a fair comment. And as we move forward, it is a discussion that we will have with the legislature. This is just I'm bringing this to the body's attention because this was the audit that was performed. There are a variety of ways of splitting the pie, so this is just one way. So I appreciate your comments, Lynn. Thank you. Any other questions regarding the PI audit? Seeing none, I'm going to move on then to item 12. Item 12 is public comments on items not on the agenda. Do I have anyone who is interested in addressing this body? Ask him if he has the, okay. Yeah, I have the script. Okay. I see several hands in the back. Please come forward and let us know who you are, and feel free. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Michael Hahn. My name is Michael Hahn. I'm actually a vice president of a security company as well as a firearms instructor and work for firearms training school. Something that just came across that we ran into the other day really is a concern for me as a firearms instructor as well as an employee. Is there the industry looking at anything about firearms security guards with the FQ cards and the use of marijuana or CBDs?
Could you repeat that question slowly? Okay. And actually, I think you had several questions there, so.
A couple. A lot of it boils down to one basic thing, okay? And I'll give you an example. I just had a person applied for an employment at a federal facility as an armed security guard, and unfortunately, his background test, his urinalysis test, drug test, popped positive for marijuana. I did contact the Bureau to say, what do I do here? And one of my biggest concerns is the Bureau said, we don't have any authority to do anything. Contact DOJ. DOJ says, we can't do anything. Contact ATF. ATF has a letter that says, no way, no how, Now, this is the licensing agency, should have the authority to do something. Is anybody looking at doing something here? I know it used to be on the application, and that question has been removed from the application.
Well, I don't. Antoine, we want to tackle that?
Well, I think in general terms, you obviously have the split between state laws and federal laws. Just because there was some traces in marijuana and urine doesn't mean that they're going to be, so to speak, high on the job. And so I think there's got to be some sort of differentiation. If we ever definitely get a complaint that somebody is high or drunk on the job, we actually do investigate that and we do take action on it. But as far as, urinalysis tests or whatnot, where, marijuana traces, THC specifically, can be present for up to several days after somebody may have, taken it in whichever way they do, then that's something a little bit different. But, I don't think we can comment on something where, it's obviously now a legal substance in the state of California, but it remains an illegal substance under federal law.
Well, the problem is, and I actually have letters for everyone on the board if they'd like it. This is actually the letter that ATF gave. And me as the employer, for example, if I were to allow this person to be in possession of the firearm or even ammunition, I'm facing criminal charges. And it doesn't say that he has to be intoxicated. It just says use of, period. Remember, the firearms permit says you can carry a firearm. Firearm still falls under federal regulations regardless what the state regulation is. If federal regulation says you can't have that, you can't have that. And this is the licensing agency right now is saying, well, we can't do anything about that. Creates, to me, a large liability and definitely a large hole. Because if he's not smoking, he's taking CBD or taking edibles. Okay? Law enforcement right now is already having problems determining at what point the person is physically intoxicated or not, or under the influence. Now, we're licensed agents. We need to take the responsibility to step up and say, hey, no. Because that's going to protect everybody in the industry, whether it's private investigator, whether it's alarm company, armed security guards, armored car service, something. And again, I have these documents I'm more than happy to leave with so everybody has them.
Thank you. And I think that in moving forward too, this is a new area, and this is a new area for all licensing boards. And it is not inconceivable that the legislature will take up this, and we'll have discussions with our sister agencies, cannabis, to explore this in the future. But I'm thankful that you bring this to our attention, because this is in fact a hole or a gap in the implementation of the allowance of cannabis use in California as recreational.
Yeah, definitely. And again, my biggest concern was when I did contact, nobody wanted to even take information. It was, got to go contact these people. I'll be honest, I took 2 days until I got this letter from ATF. So it's a scary, you know, to
Absolutely.
think that this person may be under the influence or not, who knows?
Right. Well, absolutely.
And one more quick question.
Sure.
And I'll be gone. Does anybody have any idea when they plan on doing another meeting or updating the firearms training manuals? I am a firearms instructor as well, so, and I noticed that really needs a lot of changes.
I have no answer for that.
We make
Maybe
changes
Antoine
as needed. I'm going to give you my business card afterwards. And so it's kind of we crowdsource any changes that the industry might see, and then we bring it up to the advisory committee as well. And so feel free to email me any suggestions or any concerns that you may have, and we can go from there.
Okay, good. Yeah, because I actually just went through an audit, and one of the questions I brought to them is, you know, you've got the new answer sheet. You know, there's no place in the answer sheet for the employee to, for the student to sign. So who's filling out the answer sheet?
We'll definitely, we can discuss that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt.
Can I ask you a few follow-up questions before you take off there? So your employee's got an FQ card?
He was an employee.
Okay,
Oh, correction, he was being hired as an employee and he didn't complete the test.
okay. Was this strictly for a federal building, or? My question is, I can see why the feds would say, no, our policy, any of your security guards may not use marijuana. But I imagine that a state building or a private company might not have that policy. So that's my question.
Well, this actually was for a FEMA project.
So it's federally related.
Right. However, I also have contracts with state and county, and within those contracts, it says 0 tolerance, period.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, sir.
Turn on your microphone.
Okay, what's
There's supposedly a switch at the base.
which brings me to piggyback on what he asked.
Okay.
I'm so frustrated with the firearms manual right now, and it woefully is outdated, antiquated, needs to be updated. I've chatted with folks up here. I've sent an email, and all I've gotten is the okey doke on this, and it's really frustrating.
Before you begin, will you share your name so we can get it on the record?
Sure.
Thank you.
My name is Andy Washington, and I also am a TIF and a TFF. We're still shooting based on revolvers. We're loading magazines with 6 rounds. Magazines carry 10 rounds, 11 rounds. You train like you fight like you train. Why are we still loading magazines with 6 rounds and shooting along that line? You need 5 disciplines. When shooting your firearm, you should have, we were concerned with shot placement, target acquisition, your weapons handling, which would include your reloading, trigger squeeze, breath control. If you've got all of that in place, then why can't the TIFs make their lesson plan accordingly? If the Bureau says, hey, you should have these guidelines or we require these certain disciplines, then why can't the TIFs come up with a game plan or a lesson plan for the individuals out there, the security officers? Like you said, there's more than a few things that need to be and I'll be happy if you give me a card, and if you're in serious discussions, I'll be more than happy to sit down with you and do this. I've been doing it more than 45, 50 years now. And it needs to be addressed. And all it takes is one, I guess once you get a lawsuit working, then somebody will take a look at this and say, hey, maybe we ought to look at this and change it. Well, why should it come to that? Why can't we be proactive instead of reactive? I'll get off the soapbox now, but that's what I had.
Thank you, Mr. Washington.
Sure.
Of course, we don't know what we don't know, so I'm glad that you bring this to our attention.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other public comments?
Hello, my name is Farid Denoya, and I'm an instructor over the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Farid, F-A-R-E-E-D, Denoya, D-H-A-N-O-Y-A. And I'm here to explore certain ways how we can just speed up the process of the requalifications, which are due every 6 months. So at this time, when people do submit their application, it's at the end of 2 years, when we come to find out if the person was in compliance or not, and we have no idea whether they were working while they were in compliance or not. The suggestion, the recommendation that I have is probably get all the system online with the instructor using their existing Breeze information, can log in and complete the first, second, third, including the fourth shoot online. And all that stuff doesn't need to be mailed in. Analysts sitting at BSIS can still go out there and check off all the boxes and then renew the permit. The second one I have is, right now, as soon as the permit comes live, they can print up the page from online. So instead of having the physical card being mailed out, just require them to go ahead and print up a new permit form, which is updated every 6 months, that they can print out sitting at home. So you know right then and there the person is in compliance every 6 months, like they're required to by BNP and California Code of Regulations. And this will also hopefully save, because right now we can already pay our fees online. Mailing in all those documentation, there's always that cup, the slip between the cup and the lip. And industry, especially the security guard industry, is an entry-level job industry. They don't make a whole lot of money. And if the permits are not renewed on time, sometimes those employees are removed off a schedule, sometimes for weeks, despite the fact they've already submitted the application in excess of 60 days as required. So if you can go into this automated way, and it'll be very simple for instructors, because they already fill up this one form for each shoot. All they have to do is use their Breeze information, log in, put in the FQ number of the individual who's disqualified, and just complete it online, and there'll be a record online. And we can move away from shuffling so much of paperwork, including Form 4040, that is required by the DOJ. They can use in their Breeze login information and have an electronic signature that requires the same.
Thank you. And we'll take it back to my people, and we'll take this under consideration.
Yes, thank you so much.
Chief, if I can comment on that. Number one, I agree with you 100%. But when I first came on the board, when Chief Alarcon was the chief, all of the firearms FQ recalls were supposed to go through the Breeze system.
Correct.
It became such a nightmare, and having people, and Glorielle's back there shaking her head, nodding her head, I should say, uploading, scanning, and getting it into Breeze, that it lasted just a matter of a few months before that was suspended. Now, don't get me wrong, I agree with you. I wish it could go back that way, but I know that the Bureau is still looking at that, I hope. Okay, thank you.
Just a quick follow-up on that. The system that was in place required the candidates, the individual license holder, as in a firearm card holder, permit holder, to upload, scan all those as a PDF file.
Yes.
What I'm recommending is have it as a soft format that fills in checks in all the boxes and everything else, and then you can have multiple sources to go out there and uniquely identify that individual, not only just with their name, but their permit number and their probably date of birth.
So you're suggesting that the FQ, the training facility, once the person has completed the requal, enters all that information in?
Every information that will go flawless, versus at the end of 2 years, they send in everything.
Oh,
and
I
then you have an
agree.
analyst who has to spend time look at it, and there are too many boxes to check off. Form 4040 is one. Payment is another. Fortunately now, all payments can be sent through the Breeze, which is awesome. Thank you so much for that. But those 4 qualifications, if they can also be online, and the simple fact the instructor or the facility logs in and completes for each person who comes and qualifies every 6 months. And additional benefits are that the person is current and they're not lapsed. So.
I agree. Like I say, I agree 100%.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comment? Seeing none, I'm going to put Chief Deputy Chris Schultz on the spot. I recognize that he is here, and Mr. Farnby, you need to be sworn in. So I'm going to ask Mr. Schultz, Chief Deputy Schultz. Anton has the the words, the language for you? Mr. Farnby?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Good morning, everyone. You know how to do this.
I do.
I state your name,
I, Anton Farnby,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies,
against all enemies,
foreign and domestic,
foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully
and I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
upon which I'm about to enter.
upon which I'm about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Chief, did we skip number 7, discussions of future advisory committee meetings locations?
No, I took the opportunity to merge that with the next item, so we are going to take it up now. Thank you, Frank.
I'll be patient, I promise.
I might have had an Altoid in my mouth when I mumbled it, so maybe you didn't quite catch it. So, moving on to item 7/13, committee members' recommendations for items for the next future advisory committee meeting and its location. I'm open to discussion, and my staff are anxiously awaiting to hear your recommendations and take notes on that.
Thank you, Chief, and Antoine, you can help me out here. I'd like to see on the agenda, we discussed at a last informal meeting, PI identification pocket cards, and I believe you are going to do some research into the BREEZE program, if any other industries have something similar, and how we can improve those. So if we could put that on the next agenda, that would be great.
Thank you, Frank. Any other ideas for the next meeting?
Yeah, just an idea. In terms of the BREEZE, the statistics, we got a lot of numbers during your report, Chief. Thank you for that. But it seems like we still have the Bureau doing a lot of handwork, and as we heard from the public comments as well. So I guess I would kind of like to put on the agenda in terms of further integration of the BREEZE system and perhaps some goals for increasing users on that. So I'm looking at it and thinking if we can increase BREEZE usage, we can take some of the funds that we use for processing and maintaining all the rest of the records and put that into inspections, which seems to be a little light to me, just from the numbers that you provided. So any further adoption of BREEZE and how we're going to get there. So it's mentioned in the public comments as well, and I don't know the details of BREEZE enough, but it seems like those adoption numbers could go up, or we could see some goals for those going up. Thank you.
Thank you. And just as an FYI, whenever I'm out in the public addressing industry, when I'm invited to their conferences and whatnot, one of my main messages is to encourage the use of BREEZE, not only because it is helpful in, as you indicated, shortening the turnaround times, and taking it out of the hands of humans, which have a tendency to delay the approval process. So thank you.
And I knew there was a second one, and thank you for reminding me. Also, just as a follow-up for the next advisory meeting, we also discussed last time the BREEZE system and PIs at one point only being accessible to the public by their company name, and if you ran somebody's individual name, it would show up as not licensed, which has created quite a problem for many of our licensees. So if maybe just at the next meeting, and I know, Antoine, you said that they're working on that fix right now. Perhaps if we could just get an update at the next meeting as to how that's coming along.
Yes. And in fact, after I leave this meeting, that's the next meeting on today's calendar. So to talk about how we can and what changes we want to see in the BREEZE system in order to accommodate that private investigator industry request. So thank you, Frank. Brian?
Chief, if we could add a discussion point for printing of ACB licenses, and this might expand into some other industries as well. Currently related around address of records are what are automatically printed on the ACBs, and the physical addresses, which are in a lot of cases different, are not. So it's creating a lot of confusion. So anyway, that's
So is the thought to rather than what address would you want to see on the card?
physical address versus the address of record. The address of record could be a PO box, could be a corporate
Right.
headquarters, like in my case. So anyway, and then the physical address, which is listed separately, is in your system, but it's not printed on the ACB. So therefore, what's hanging in the lobby of the ACBs will have a different address, could even have a PO box, depending on the situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other, Stan?
I received a couple of requests from retired fellow police officers who asked if we could take a look at opportunities for an honorably retiring or retired police officer to streamline the process of obtaining a private investigator's license or an armed security officer licenses. And they gave me a couple of examples, one of which I heard at a prior board meeting, that we may be able to streamline the process. One of the responses we received is some of those changes may require legislation, and maybe at least we can begin re-examining opportunities. It would help, to Frank's issue or his statement earlier, help inspire or encourage retiring police officers to think of this opportunity for future employment. I took a quick peek at the process myself, and it's not overly challenging, but I saw opportunities to speed up that process a bit, and then maybe turning around those changes with an informational to the Cal Sheriffs, Cal Police Chiefs, and they can push it out in their publications to let retiring officers know that, hey, this is an opportunity for you. We recognize your service to California, and it's a good future career for you.
Thank you, Stan. Any other?
Chief, are there any recommendations or suggestions related to number 7, or is that currently up for discussion now?
It's open for discussion. We're meeting in Sacramento, which is Northern California. Last October, we met in Sacramento, which is Northern California. And in prior discussions, it was suggested maybe we might want to consider Southern California. And so I put it on the agenda so we can have that discussion. I want to kind of measure how robust desire to have it in Southern California and timing and whatnot like that. So
Well, I don't know how robust, but I'm a robust of one, being from Southern California. I think that considering that the board, I don't know the makeup of the board and geographically where folks are from, but not to really put a wrinkle in it, but if it's something that can be accommodated, I think that would be something to be considered. But if more folks are from Northern California is more conducive, then I don't have a problem with it. But just from a general perspective, if there was a possibility to maybe rotate them, I think that would be helpful.
But can we
my
take
opinion.
maybe we take a quick straw poll right now? Who's from where?
of course.
Oh, okay, how about Southern California?
Yeah, Orange County.
Okay, so it's fairly evenly matched. Okay.
But I travel all the time, so it's not that fair. So, yeah.
Eli? Stan? Lynn? Right, yeah. Actually, it kind of leans toward Northern California rather than evenly split, but yeah. And so, is there a desire, let's see, our next meeting, it will probably be around May. Is there a strong enough desire to consider, for us to look into Southern California in May?
I guess just as a consideration, from a budgetary perspective, I mean, how many staff do we need to take to Southern California? I mean, we've got everyone up here in Sacramento, and will that perhaps curtail our discussions or make our board meetings less productive? And it's just a question, so.
And I thank you for that, because that weighs heavily on my mind as well. Would a Northern California meeting, maybe further south, like San Francisco or Oakland, be of any benefit or of any consideration? I mean, it's just that we have all these meetings in Sacramento, and I'm not adverse to having meetings in Sacramento because I get, quite frankly, a lot more work done on that day. But having said that, I'm just open to suggestions. But we have a few months before we schedule the next meeting, so if there's a strong desire, please let Anton know.
Yeah, my concern with that suggestion would be, and I'm saying this delicately, right now, these may be inconvenient for 3 or 4 members. That, if it was San Francisco or so, it seems it would be inconvenient for all of us.
Yeah, I get that. I was just throwing out an idea. Keep the conversation going.
I want to throw out food for thought too, is that aside from the impact of all of us, I mean, we may be able to get a lot different or more diverse public comment from going south.
Okay. Is there any other comments or discussion for the good of the order? Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Have a motion, do I have a second?
A second.
Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nobody opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for your time.